So Canoo has declared bankruptcy. This promising EV company that I was a pretty strong supporter of, enough to do 14 videos about it since about mid-2021, has closed its doors. Now, I've collected those old videos over at the main channel under a playlist called My Canoo History, so we can all go back and laugh at my opinions from 3 years ago. But this company had a proposal for commercial vehicles, for a minivan, a lifestyle vehicle, a pickup truck that I got really excited about, enough that I bought a tiny bit of stock in the company to put my money where my mouth was, which I've now lost, so never take stock advice from me. But now they've closed their doors, and this is Chapter 7 bankruptcy. This means they are liquidating. They're not trying to restructure. They're just trying to liquidate their assets. But what the heck happened? Well, it boils down to one overarching theory: bad management. But I think it comes down to 3 individual items within that we're going to dig in here today in a brief way. The rise and the downfall of Canoo could be an entire documentary on its own, and that's not what we're trying to do today. I'm going to give you a history and give you a lot of my thoughts. So let's dig into it, because I think the first thing is a failure to pivot too often. Canoo started in 2017 with 2 founders from Faraday Future, and the original name of the country was Velocity. And they were intending to offer vans through a subscription service to a West Coast, tech-focused, and novel end-to-end view of the life of the vehicle, with a headquarters in Torrance, California. In 2019, they changed their name to Canoo, and they presented their lifestyle vehicle. In 2020, they partnered with Hyundai to develop an EV platform. They were in talks with Apple around the so-called Apple car, the Titan car, and one of the co-founders left the company. They were featured on Jay Leno's Garage, but most importantly, they merged with an SPAC to get listed on the NASDAQ, intending to raise $300 million to move towards production. And they announced the multi-purpose delivery vehicle. In 2021, they announced the pickup truck, the one that got me excited about them. The Hyundai partnership was terminated. They announced changes to selling to commercial vehicles, and other co-founder leaves and was replaced with Tony Aquila as the CEO, perhaps the most impactful decision they made. The SEC began investigating their merger, the executive departures, changes to the business model, class action lawsuit by shareholders, and more, leading to a lot of uncertainty around the company. But they said they had an intent to build a factory in Pryor, Oklahoma, capable of producing 300,000 vehicles per year by 2023. They had an intent to have VDL Nedcar produce minivans for the European market, which was later canceled that same year. And they announced plans for a battery production facility in Pryor as well. They announced moving their headquarters to Bentonville, Arkansas, to build yet another plant. And they leased a plant for an initial low volume of production. That December, Torrance was still listed as the HQ, and by 2024, it was shown that the HQ was in Justin, Texas. In 2022, they contracted with a third party for the initial vehicle production. They contracted with NASA to create the Artemis Crew vehicle, which yielded them a total of about $148,000. They also signed an agreement with Walmart for 4,800 LDVs as an option to buy up to 10,000, but with a 30-day termination, and they couldn't sell to Amazon. This was the golden handcuffs for the company. They got the news of being able to partner with Walmart with no confirmed orders, and they couldn't sell to their primary competitor, which was invested in Rivian. Now, around this factor, I actually thought there was a huge opportunity. I believed that, much like Amazon with Rivian, that Walmart would invest in Canoo. that Walmart could convert their auto service centers into something a little better and offer Canoos for sale, so Canoo didn't have to go build out their own distribution network. They could just tie into Walmart. I believe this was a true capitalistic win-win-win opportunity for both companies that obviously never came to fruition. Also in 2022, Zeba, a fleet leasing company, ordered 5,454 LDVs and LVs, and Kingbee, a work-ready fleet leasing company, ordered 9,300 LDVs. But their SEC reports also showed they had trouble with funding, and they questioned themselves as an ongoing concern, something that went on for the next 2 years. And finally, they announced an agreement to purchase a plant in Oklahoma to start production in 2023. In 2023, battery production started in Pryor, Oklahoma to fulfill a U.S. Department of Defense contract, and they bought an Oklahoma City plant from Terex for $34 million. The year's end report showed that they made a total of $886,000 delivering just 22 vehicles, but they paid double that to the CEO to reimburse him for the use of his private aircraft. Not the mark of a success of a up-and-coming company. In 2024, USPS ordered exactly 6 right-hand drive LDVs. They acquired the assets from a British EV startup called Arrival, and they bought used production equipment. And in December, they decided to start furloughing their 82 employees in Oklahoma, and they idled the factory while looking for additional funding. January 17th, 2025, they filed Chapter 7, and they listed only $50,000 in assets. Now, there's a lot else here behind the scenes. They were public, and they did a split, They got a lot more funding, and whereas most companies get a big bulk of funding and then eat into it, these guys tried to present it as it was a positive to get funding on a quarter-by-quarter basis, much of it coming from the CEO's own company, their own holding company. They felt that that kept them lean while spending money on the CEO's private jet. They just didn't have the money to get up to production, and Elon Musk actually said once on Twitter that it's easy to make prototypes, it's hard to get to production. And that moves us to part 2, which is communication. Now, they do apparently have a PR department, but it seems very random. On Instagram and other social media, they just seem to post up whatever they felt like, whenever they felt like it, and there was no coordinated effort over the years to create excitement around the company. And specifically, I want to say that I reached out to the company multiple times. I offered at my own expense to drive to Arkansas, put myself up in a hotel for the chance to drive and record one of their cars. Now, they did have a few media events. Sandy Munro had a chance to look at one. They had a few newscasters in, and I think it was TFL had a chance to see one, ride along with one at maybe the New York Auto Show. But they never really tied into the influencers. Where was Alex on Autos? Where was Redline Reviews? Where were all the others that could give feedback and get interest in the company? Would that directly save the company? No, of course not, but it would generate more interest and more knowledge around potential small-time investors. And it was just totally non-existent. And compare that to VinFast. Now, that Vietnamese company is not exactly being successful with a somewhat miserable product, but when they launched big. In addition to being at auto shows, they had 2 separate events where they flew influencers and journalists over to Vietnam to put them up in luxuries and see the factory and drive the vehicles. Where was that for Canoo? It tells me they didn't have a belief in their product and a belief in where they were. And that leads us to number 3, which is they were out of date before they ever launched. The idea of building a skateboard and putting different top hats on top of it is really an exciting idea. And honestly, something similar has been proposed since the 80s. I remember them saying that Saturn was going to be able to be constantly refreshed thanks to the plastic panels that could just be bolted on, but that never really happened. But the idea of having a skateboard EV platform and putting different tops on it, like a minivan or a delivery vehicle or a car, which they teased in some of their earlier images, is exciting. But it seems to be much harder to implement than implied. Consider that other manufacturers with skateboard platforms like General Motors or Hyundai, they are not coming out with new products and new top hats every single year. These require modifications to the skateboard for pedals and things like that, unless you have a truly drive-by-wire experience, which is what Canoo was striving for. But what you were left with was a platform, a battery, motors, drive-by-wire, and assistance that really was not that different than what anybody else was offering other than styling. And that's critically important here. Styling can be copied. And unfortunately, the technology behind the rest of it was slowly becoming out of date. When they started talking about the pickup, they said it was going to have 200 miles of range. That would leave it behind its competitors from the get-go. Same with the minivan. For an electric delivery vehicle, it was probably competitive, but smaller than what Rivian was offering. So the fact is that by the time we got to 2024, the technology was already sliding behind the times. So as they move forward to bankruptcy, what assets do they really have? Well, they have a factory and they have some leases and they have, well, their IP, their intellectual property has no real value by itself. I think that for the most part, it's been superseded by almost everyone else. So in conclusion, this bankruptcy honestly breaks my heart. I don't think Canoo had a chance of challenging Tesla in the EV space. And admittedly, they were going to become kind of maybe hopefully a mid-sized player in the 9-10% of the market that is EVs. And we have a new administration which is against EVs and going to cancel the federal subsidies for them. But I thought they had a chance because one thing they did, while the technology might have not been cutting edge, while Rivian was still out there competing largely in the same space, I felt Canoo had an emotive connection. Their minivan, their lifestyle vehicle, I thought it would have been a hit with those who wanted to have an all-wheel drive option to go off into the woods for the weekend. I thought their pickup truck would have stood alone in the space. There would have been no direct competitors to it. They had a chance to make a splash while making their money in the commercial space. And somehow it all just fell apart. They pivoted too many times between a subscription service and selling commercial and wanting to sell to you and I as well. While moving headquarters, 3 different factories were planned. They started minor production. They did deliver to a state. And even then, it was a nightmare because they didn't seem to have a PR department. They said they delivered vehicles, and the state actually responded with, well, we haven't received anything. And later they were delivered. So it was a miscommunication, a misdelivery in the information. And that seems to be what happened. Would communication have saved the company? No, it would not have. I think the intellectual property and the leadership and the constant pivots were what undermined it. So when they went out to bigger investors, consider Warren Buffett or the Middle East, the Saudi Arabia fund that invests in companies like this, where was the money? They were turned down for a Department of, I believe, Energy loan. And that's ultimately what killed the company. Something in here said they had no real differentiator versus other companies out there. No real hope of success because they didn't have anything to make it special other than styling, which can be copied. And that kind of breaks my heart. I thought really seriously several years ago about putting a deposit in on that pickup truck because I believed in it. A cab over EV with all kinds of utility. This is all me. This is an American EV key truck. And now they're gone, and it breaks my heart. So what happened? Too many pivots, bad communication, bad development, and no real intellectual property that made them different from the billions that others are actually spending on it while they tried to bootstrap their way to a few dozen sales. I hate that they're gone, guys. Thanks for being here. Let me know what you think below.